All right, so we're going to do a little 3-week or so series on the book of Colossians, and there's some facts that I just want you to be aware of. It's the book of Colossians is considered one of the 4 prison epistles. The other are Ephesians, Philippians, and Philemon. It was written by the Apostle Paul somewhere between 60 and 64 from Rome during his first imprisonment. And the church at Colossae was established by Ephorus, and at the time of the writing of the Colossians letter, Paul had not been there to visit. And even though the epistle was named after the church of Colossae, the intent was to be read for a large area of churches that surrounded not only the city but the territory, but also his churches in Laodicea as well. So we know those are some of the facts, but what we also know that he wrote this letter during the time where there was some problems among those early Christians. Surprising that problems in church. It was a doctrinal problem, and sometimes we describe it as the Colossian heresy. You might have heard it. And the Colossian heresy is actually really difficult to precisely describe, but it was probably a combination of elements of mystical and Jewish legalism combined with early Gnosticism. So it was really complicated, and it was kind of predictable as well because, again, in the early church, there was a time of mixing. People borrowed a little bit from here of their belief and a little bit from their religion and a little bit from there, and they formed some belief systems. But whatever the Colossian heresy problem was, Paul did not dwell on the problem. Paul wanted us to dwell on the solution, which is a better understanding of Jesus. That's the solution to the Colossian heresy. Paul reminds us, as the readers in the book, that forgiveness is a virtue, and that not forgiving others becomes a deficit for us. We should forgive the way that God has forgiven us. We are to clothe ourselves with forgiveness, forbearing one another, forgiving one another as Christ has forgiven us. So Paul also reminds us as we read this book of Colossians to focus on things that matter, heavenly matters, or matters concerning our faithfulness, or matters concerning the presence of Christ, faith and hope and love and unity and justice and mercy, not on the things of the earth, things like material things and money and possessions and power. It says, seek the things that are above where Christ is. Set your minds on things that are above, not on things that are on earth. So as the letter of Colossians begins, Paul writes, to the saints and faithful brothers and sisters in Christ in Colossae, grace and peace from God our Father. All right, so Paul begins his letter in a typical way. He tells who wrote it, he tells to whom the letter is being sent, and he provides a short greeting. And I found it really interesting that when he opens the letter, he uses the phrase, grace to you. And he uses that same phrase to start all the other prison epistles. And he also uses that phrase in all the letters he writes except to Timothy and Titus. And it is revealing. It says that Paul's an apostle, a person whom God personally sends to share, teach about Christ. It tells us that Timothy was a partner who traveled and worked with Paul. It reminds us that even though we belong to individual kind of different physical families, we are brothers and sisters in Christ. We are part of God's family. It introduces this notion of saints, and we know that saints are God's holy ones. Saints and holy are similar words in the Greek, and part of the meaning is to become separate. It means that we have separated ourselves from unhealthy and holy living and connected ourselves to the vine, to Christ. We have left the old life of sin and entered the new life of forgiveness. We now serve God. And then he throws this whole notion of grace out as a gift, and he adds peace to the formula. And the greeting has a lot of richness in it. And he basically says, peace to you. Because you can't have peace without God's grace. And peace is this calmness in spirit with purpose to proceed with great resolve. Peace is not just the absence of war, it's the resolve of greatness to live out our faith with calmness and purpose. So just in those two verses, we get a whole lot, and then we hear this following that they're praying for those people. They're always thanking God for them, for their faith and the love. And in most of Paul's letter, what we discover is that he thanked God for the people who read his words. He thanked and prayed for the people of the churches he had visited. He prayed for the churches he heard about. He prayed for the churches he wrote to. Paul prayed a lot. And his journey was filled with a commitment to prayer. And now what we hear is that he prays for the beloved of Colossae. And the prayer includes leading lives worthy of the Lord. It includes bearing fruit in every good work. It includes growing in the knowledge of God. It includes increasing strength. It includes preparing to endure with patience and thanksgiving. And it includes sharing the inheritance. So now I could basically sit down, but that would not be any fun. Because if you look at those items, is that not a formula in order for us to be more Christ-like? Living worthy lives, bearing fruit, growing in knowledge, becoming stronger, enduring with patience, joy, and gratitude, and sharing in the inheritance of the saints in the light. So we're going to break it down for a couple hours, and so I'll invite you to get comfortable, because it's going to take a long time. I've tried to cut this thing down and down and down, and just won't do it. So they pray for a life worthy of the Lord, leading lives worthy. So what leading lives can actually be translated as walk, and walk is this frequently used image in the New Testament to deal with our daily conduct, our day-to-day living. One of the Bible study books I read was that when we were born, walking was not an immediate skill we performed. It was something that had to be learned. And the same is true about being faithful. Walking with God is a practical skill that takes time to learn. And once you learn to walk as a Christian, to live worthy of the Lord, you have a whole lifetime to practice it. It's not just something you get and you're done. It's something that unfolds, that you live into. And it takes a lifetime to practice how to live a worthy life. So their prayer for those brothers and sisters of Colossae was that they would walk daily worthy of their calling. Walking worthy of their daily calling. So what is worthy living? Now, it has been written that worthy has its root in meaning of balancing the scales. So, what is on one side of the scale should equal in weight to what is on the other side of the scale. And by extension, the word came to be applied to anything that was expected to correspond with something else. A person's worthy of her pay was one that worked, whose day work corresponded with her daily wages. And the believer who walks in a manner worthy of the calling which he has been called is worthy of the life that he lives, which corresponds to his belief. So, worthy living occurs when one practices living matches one's spiritual position. Worthy living occurs when one's practical living matches one's spiritual positions. That's what worthy life living is. Does it match? Does your life, daily practices match what you believe? So here are the questions I want you to tarry with. What does it mean for you to live a worthy life? And what do you need to strengthen your daily walk of faith? What does it mean for you to live a worthy life? And what do you need to strengthen that walk? So then he prays for what? To bear good fruit. To bear fruit with good works. Now that's interesting because it seems that not all good works produce fruit. Does not assume that just because it's good work, it produces something of faith. It doesn't bear fruit. So as individuals, we are called to do actions of generosity and compassion, service, peacemaking, justice, witness, respect. And these are the fruits of life turned to God, a mind and heart changed by the Spirit of God. And as a community, the beloved here, we are called to bear fruit as well. It's not enough to gather for common emotion and support. We are brought together in Christ to bear fruit, to engage in God's mission, to do acts of restoration, renewal, and reconciliation in the world around us and in our lives. Bearing fruit is a result of living more Christ-like. So living more Christ-like means that we'll bear more fruit. So here's your question to Terry. In your good works, what are the fruits that you are producing? In your good works, what are the fruits that you are producing? And then they pray for the gaining of knowledge, the growing of knowledge. And the path here, the context shows the path toward the knowledge of God indicates that it's not a path of kind of thoughtful speculation, theological discourse, or meditative devotion, but there's another path, and it's the path of earnest practice. Earnest comes from the Old English word meaning zealous or serious. And we know what practice does, right? We know that if we practice over and over and over and over again an attitude or behavior, we get better at it, right? Practice makes, well, that's what they say. Just might make better skill as well. So we practice our skills in sports. We practice our instruments. It's not to honk. We put into practice what matters to us. And so the prayer is that it matters to us that we practice our faith. That we are earnest in practicing living out our faith. Because in living out that, it is a pathway to become more connected with each other and God. Earnest practice helps us to be deeper connected with God. So, here's your question. What does your practice schedule look like as it relates to becoming more deeply connected to God? Where in your calendar, on your day, is practice being more faithful? So up to this point, the prayer for the beloved in Colossae included leading lives worthy of the gospel, bearing fruit by doing good works, and growing in the knowledge of God. But they keep praying. Their prayer continues on, and they pray now to increase strength. And the stronger you become, the more you can carry. And that's not so much about muscle size as much as it is about the strength of your head and your heart and your character. The stronger you become, the more you can carry. And I always suggest that becoming stronger is the byproduct of earnest practice. Now, I was going to tell you a parable about how I'm going to the gym, getting stronger and stronger, increasing my muscles, but that would be a lie, and that's not worthy living of the Lord, because I'm not. But it did get me to think about my daily routines and how I fit earnest practice into conscious daily living. So my challenge to you is just to pick one of your strengths and improve yourself. Pick one of your strengths, one of the fruit of the Spirit that you produce, that you bear in your good works, and become stronger in it. Because we can always grow, become more kind, more creative, more responsive. We become more responsible, braver, bolder. We can become more compassionate as we increase our strength, because the stronger we become, the stronger others become. And the stronger we become, the more prepared we are to endure whatever lies ahead. And it's just not increasing our strength to endure, it's increasing our strength to endure with patience, joy, and gratitude. Whatever lies ahead of us in our walk, our response is unwavering from our purpose. For I have learned, Paul writes, to be content in whatever circumstance. I know what it is to be in need, and I know what it is to have plenty. I have learned the secret of being content in every and any situation, whether well-fed or hungry, whether in plenty or want, because I can do all things to the one who gives me strength. So there's one more thing that Paul's prayers include. It's the result. It's the expectation that those people way back then in that little tiny insignificant town and territory, or perhaps the expectation for us today, is that we get to share in the inheritance. We get to share in the inheritance of the saints in the light. And so there's such a richness in Paul's opening words to the beloved here, and I'll suggest that path, that prayer is really a path for us to learn a greater sense of faithfulness. So what might happen? What might happen if each of us makes a deeper commitment to walk every day worthy of the Lord, to continue to do good works that produce the fruit of the Spirit, not the result of the work? What could happen here at Pine Shores, in our community, in our nation, if we earnestly practiced growing in the knowledge of God? How much stronger would we become as we serve the needs of a hurting and broken world. What kind of influence can we embody if we are filled with patience and joy and gratitude? Friends, we get to share the inheritance of the saints who shine and share the light of Christ. So read this passage again and hold on to that path that Paul offers. Because see, if we do that, if we can do that, this world will be a much better place. This world will be more Christ-like.